I mean, I've always been interested in nature.
Kind of Mother Nature's perfect animal, you know?
Seeing Nile crocodiles and being kind of terrified.
Welcome to the Nature Talks podcast.
Hello to all, welcome to another of our Nature Talk episode where learning turns to conservation. Today we are discussing about the biggest problem in our oceans. It's not ocean acidification, it's something that began very, very long back. It's plastic pollution. And with me is Amy from Kids Against Plastic. Amy, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Amy. I'm 18 years old. I'm from the UK, and together with my younger sister Ella, I co-founded and co-run a charity called Kids Against Plastic, which we've been running since February 2016.
So I believe that's an extraordinary start. So Amy, how did this all begin?
Well, for us, we sort of discovered plastic pollution as an issue back, as I said, beginning of 2016, when we were 12 and 10 years old, and we were just really shocked at the scale of this issue. It was something that we hadn't really come across before we found it through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we were just kind of scared really by the massive impact it was having on the planet and how little we knew about it, and also how our habits and probably many other ordinary people's habits were contributing to this massive problem every day. And so we decided that we just wanted to do our bit to help address it, just to try and raise awareness, because we always had this view that if we didn't start, if we didn't do anything, then who was to say that someone else would? And so that's really how Kids Against Plastic began.
So of course it is about our own future, and it's something which you're going to inherit. Back when I first started my research 7 years back, I can say that the world was much more biodiverse. And when I'm talking about that, I live in the United Arab Emirates, and the desert itself is you cannot find much about the wildlife. That's the main thing. So if you go there in the morning, except becoming a bit heat sick, we can say, you're not going to find anything. But the oceans was where all these began, the inspiration began. Well, they are the biggest ecosystem on our planet. And going there as a young person, I think you must also have the same journey, because it all begins in the oceans. Plastic begins in the oceans. You go see, well, what's that? Is it a fish? You get a closer look. Oh, it's a chocolate wrapper. It's something else. And it must not be there. That's the main point. And then there is a small sort of video I'm planning to make about plastic pollution to show, well, it never goes away. And the extraordinary thing is that even after thousands of years, seeing that plastic, it looks like it's just yesterday it being thrown in the oceans. So Amy, what do you think is the reason we must stand against plastic pollution?
I think it's a really good question. I think it's a really big one. I think one of the main reasons is exactly as you said. Plastic is this, it is an amazing material. The problem is we're just using it for purposes that it's completely not fit for, because how does it make sense to use this material that lasts for long periods of time to make things that we use for 5 or 10 minutes, like a plastic bag, for example? There's just this real mismatch between the material and what we're using it for. And I think that's why it's such a big problem, because every year that we don't take action against plastic pollution, 8 to 12 million tons of plastic are entering the oceans, and that is accumulating over time, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. Items of plastic last for hundreds of years, and even then they just break down into really tiny pieces. So I think one of the things that makes plastic pollution an issue that it's so necessary to address is because it just needs to be tackled with such urgency, because it's not a new issue. It's already been around, as you said, for decades really. And every year now that we delay more action against it, as with other environmental issues really, is another year that this problem is just spiraling out of control and going to be inherited by our generation as well. And we're going to pick up this massive plastic legacy from our parents and from current times. So I think that's why it's so necessary to address this issue really urgently.
I completely agree with you. I believe that, well, it's pretty extraordinary that a person that loves nature, I think you two as well, well, come on, there is more to speak about the problems humans have caused than truly about the natural world. Whether it's biodiversity loss, climate change, plastic pollution, coral bleaching. It simply never ends. And well, when I myself always address something about plastic pollution, what people come to me and ask, especially small children, they ask, are animals stupid that eat the plastic? Well, what do you think the answer to that is, Amy?
I think blaming animals, to be fair, for eating plastic is a little bit unfair, especially as, you know, we say plastic pollution's been around for a long time, but in the grand scheme of nature and the planet, it's been around for a snapshot of time. It's been around for, you know, 100 years maximum, really, in mass scale. And so it is a really new material for all these animals that have been around on the planet for hundreds of years. And plastic, you know, is really deceiving. I mean, there's pictures that humans can't even tell the difference between a plastic bag and a jellyfish. So how can an animal that's evolved to not really even know what plastic is be able to tell the difference? And I think the other thing is, it's not just animals that are eating this plastic. You know, we are, without even knowing it. Obviously, we're not going to go along and, you know, pick up a plastic bag and eat it, but we are ingesting, you know, a credit card's worth of plastic and each week, and that's a really striking amount, and we don't know we're doing it. So ultimately, this is an issue that is affecting all forms of life on this planet, and I think that's why, you know, it's why it's so urgent to address it, because not only is it impacting these animals, but it's also impacting us, and we're not even aware of it most of the time.
I completely agree. It's pretty scary because, well, it sounds scary when you think that plastic is within us also, and when we think of it. We were living at a point of the most stable period in our planet's history. It was, of course, the Holocene, and in which the thriving biodiversity, the living world around us, was the main key to this stability. And well, I wish it was only plastic pollution, but then it's climate change. All these problems, we threw at it, and now our world is changing. I'm witnessing myself. They say what you believe, you see. And climate change, when we speak about it, the UAE had no rains at all this year. The winter has not come yet, and it's pretty scary. Now, the main reason of why animals eat plastic is due to the extraordinary way plastic mimics, you know, their diet. Well, of course, as we know it, around at least 180 species consume plastic, from tiny plankton to gigantic whales. And with 12.7 million tons of plastic entering the oceans every year, there is plenty to go around. And many animals, including sharks and such, rely on their sense of smell to find their food. And experiments suggest that some seabirds and fish are attracted to plastic by its odor. When an algae that grows on a plastic is eaten by krill, dimethyl sulfide is released. This compound is known to attract birds and fish who, you know, in return eat the plastic instead of the krill. And it's also proven that the way the plastic looks, the coloration, will actually attract different animals too. It is believed that, let's say, older sea turtles target colorless, translucent plastic, while younger turtles prefer around yellowish red. So it's pretty extraordinary that we see it just ended up in the oceans, and it has had such a big impact that some of my specimens that I collect, for example, I've got around 177 specimens, and I guess most of them, including the squids and all, had plastic in them. And it's pretty shocking that, well, the fish we eat might have plastic in them also. So, maybe what do you think? How can we address this problem, especially the younger generation? Because, well, most of them, we are set apart from the natural world. And it's, let's say, me and you and all similar to us, which can help change the ideas. So what do you think we can do for the younger generation to help them get involved and understand the problems about plastic pollution?
I I think it's a really important question. I think there's lots of different ways, and to be honest, I think especially as a young person, we through our charity do a lot of work with young kids, and I think the first thing to do is just not be overwhelmed by the scale of this issue, because as you said, you know, there are all these really scary facts about plastic, about the impacts it's having, about, for example, like you said, the chemical absorption of it and the mimicking of hormones and all of these really scary things about plastic. But actually trying not to get overwhelmed is a really important part of it. And I think that especially one of the things that's really tangible about plastic that is, you know, slightly dissimilar to climate change in this way is that it's something we can literally see is an issue that's right in front of us. But it's also one that we can directly trace back to the plastics that we use and the plastics we consume. And I think that, for example, some of the top ocean plastic pollutants are plastic bottles and plastic bags. And these items globally outrank items like plastic fishing line, especially in, for example, the Mediterranean, where there's been some studies recently on it. And so even though we don't use plastic bottles and plastic bags a lot at sea like fishing line is, they're still items that are the top pollutants of the ocean and of the environment. And they're items that we all use pretty much, and they're ones that we use on land. So even if you are disconnected from the ocean and from the environment, I mean, I live probably the furthest you can get from the sea in the UK, the impact that we're all having, it links back to these environments through river systems, just through, you know, the improper waste disposal. And so what's really good about that is it gives you a really clear thing that you can do straight away to have a positive impact on this issue, and that's reduce your plastic consumption. I think that's just such a perfect way to start. We always encourage people to be what we call plastic clever and not try and take a massive step to immediately cut all plastic from your life, because it's really difficult to do, pretty expensive. And so just tackling, for example, the top 4 plastic items that you use in your everyday life, whether it is a plastic bottle or a bag or a straw, it actually has a really big positive impact on the planet, and it really shows as well how reducing plastic consumption can have a big impact. And then once you've done that, that's where spreading awareness comes in. That's where kind of lobbying, taking action on a larger scale can come into play. But I think especially as a young person, just don't underestimate the impact that changes that you make and changes that others make will actually have on this issue, because ultimately it's come from an overconsumption of this material. So if we reduce our consumption in the first place, then that's how we're going to stop this problem.
I completely agree, because people think, well, with an animal, of course I'm researching on animals, so I keep bringing animals in between. So people think that when an animal eats plastic, let's say turtle, when plastic is gone, the animal dies and the plastic dies with it. But the truth is that when the animal decays, the plastic is not digested and is again released back into the ecosystem to kill more of the marine wildlife. And it's pretty shocking. There's no proper word which comes to my mind when we talk about plastic pollution. And I believe that I think an issue that must be focused on is there are things which we can replace plastic with, but unfortunately they are more expensive than the plastic product itself. Let's say reusable cups, reusable bags, for example. In here, for example, a plastic cup is around 10 dirhams, you can say. But the similar one, more disposable one, is for 20. So people, of course, won't buy the more expensive products. So, and if suddenly the whole economy turns in a way in which plastic becomes expensive and reusable items become, cheaper, they in turn, quickly change their use of plastics. So, Amy, I'm going to ask you a very fun but difficult question. So, what about yourself? How much plastic do you consume?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think we're not going to say ever that we're completely plastic free. I mean, we've been campaigning against this issue for almost 6 years, and still for us, it's been impossible for us to cut our plastic consumption. I mean, we've done what we can. For example, we don't use Like some of the main plastic items that are single-use ones, like bottles, bags, straws, coffee cups, lids, cutlery. We avoid items like that, and we go to a zero waste shop near us, which has opened really recently, to get refills of things like shampoo and conditioners and pulses and things like that. But you know, we still ultimately, we're completely ordinary people. We go to school, our parents go to work. We don't have unlimited time on our hands and unlimited money to sort of avoid the supermarket completely and completely cut plastic from our life. Because ultimately, if you do go to the supermarket and you try and do a plastic-free shop, which we have tried before, you very quickly realize that this is something that, you know, is practically impossible, and it can be really demoralizing. But that's why I think just kind of taking it a step at a time is so important. And you know, we started with our everyday items like the ones I mentioned, and then we went to our bathroom and we cut plastic from our bathroom using bamboo toothbrushes, reusable containers. Then we went to the kitchen and we started working on reusing items to refill kind of things like pulses. But we're not perfect, and I don't think it's about being perfect. I think it's just trying to do something immediately that makes the really big difference. And I think exactly as you said, ultimately we need to see large changes in industry going alongside individual changes. We need to see things like supermarkets stop using so much single-use plastic. And actually, you know, I saw a really good quote from a talk I was attending recently, which was that plastic is not priced at really what it should be for what it is as a material. It's got these amazing qualities, but also such a harmful side to it. So it should almost be this material that we save for really special things that it's needed for the really essential uses, and yet it's not. And so that really needs to change for consumption of plastic to really change as well. And I think though that the thing you were saying about alternatives to plastic is a really important thing to consider though, because also it doesn't have to be something that's really expensive to try, but using, for example, a reusable cup, it might seem like a bit more of an initial investment, and it is, you know, you can get some quite expensive ones, but you can get cheaper reusable ones. But ultimately that cost of using that reusable cup multiple times instead of getting a single-use one is actually going to save you money over time. It's been proven, especially as you can get discounts often on using reusable items. So I think it's just about looking at what's available to you, looking at what you can do, and you know, that's exactly what we've done, and that's just what we encourage other people to do as well.
So now the audience might think, well, why did they ask this question from me? And I'm going to tell you the reason behind it. It's not about how much plastic you use, you know, it's about the impact you have. I once heard in a meeting, it doesn't matter how much followers or subscribers you have, it matters how many of those are truly inspired and impacted by your work indeed. We can use plastic forever, but we must do it in the right manner. If we use the amount of plastic and recycle it, reuse it in the right way, we can well use plastic. But then because all those plastic is not reused and recycled, and well, because of our laziness, is thrown in the oceans, it comes back to us, because waste indeed is not waste at all. It returns to us in many different ways. And it is a huge impact. The funny part is we cannot truly burn plastic. We cannot get rid of it in other manners. We cannot let it be in the oceans because they have the tendency to go all the way to deep sea also. So the only choice is collecting and recycling it, because it releases more poisonous gases when it's burned than when it normally does. But the impact is still very much similar. So Amy, now speaking about pollution, what do you think is the next biggest problem you are or indeed planning to focus on?
I think that actually, I think plastics is such a diverse issue that you know, it's still an issue that we're going to be focusing on a lot, because it goes exactly as you were saying, a lot further than just the macroplastics, the large pieces of plastic that we see floating on the ocean. And even if we crack that, even if we reduce consumption globally and we set up proper recycling systems to actually utilize this waste and reuse it for new products, plastics as an issue isn't going away, not only because it's still going to be in the environment and it's still going to need cleaning up, but also because it impacts in so many other different ways. You're still going to have microplastic pollution, microbeads in things like facial products, and in particular microfibers are a really big upcoming problem to do with plastics, and something that I've been doing a lot of research on myself as part of a school project I was doing and a research project as part of the charity. And it just really shows how plastics have just infiltrated so many different fields. And microplastics come from our clothing, which you wouldn't imagine would ever be a source of plastic pollution, and yet are, and are causing really extreme concern for marine biologists because of the way they're going to enter food systems and interfere with chemical systems. So I think plastics the problem is it's such a wide issue that even if we tackle one part of it, we're still going to have to tackle another. And it ties so closely to other issues like climate change as well. So I don't think it's a problem that's going away anytime soon. And so it's certainly not one that we're going to stop addressing anytime soon either.
Yeah, I completely agree, because all these problems are somehow or another interlinked. I mainly focus on biodiversity loss. People usually what they speak about now is climate change and global warming. But if we look, all these problems are interlinked. And the top twins, I like to call them, are climate change and biodiversity loss. And biodiversity loss can be a result of climate change, can be a loss of plastic pollution. It can be a loss of human beings, indeed, in general, we can say. Because we know it, 5 mass extinctions have taken place over Earth's 4.5 billion year history. And truly always the natural world rebuilds. And if we look at it, back in prehistoric times, it took volcanic activities over 1 million years to produce enough carbon from within the Earth's surface to cause a catastrophe. But now the funny part is we are doing this by burning billions of words of living organisms as coal and oil in just 1,000 years, 1,000 million years, just turn to 200. And we can see that plastic pollution is linked to biodiversity loss. And biodiversity loss is the best, we can say biodiversity itself is the best way we can fight against climate change and other problems. So Amy, what do you think? How is plastic pollution related to climate change, biodiversity loss, and other global human-caused problems?
I think it's a really important point. I think so often we consider environmental issues, exactly as you were saying, to be really isolated when actually they're so interlinked, and you can't address climate change, for example, without addressing biodiversity loss and addressing plastic pollution. And I think that's just because so many of them are so interlinked in the impacts they're having and also the causes. So I think one of the clear impacts of plastic pollution is how it links to, biodiversity loss through, the impact it has on wildlife, the impact it has on the oceans, interference with really important systems within the environment and habitat. But also I think one of the really interesting things and worrying things about plastic pollution is its link to climate change, because I would say there's probably 2 main links of plastic to climate change. The first one being that most plastics are petroleum plastics, which means that they're produced from fossil fuels, exactly as you were saying, which are one of the leading causes of the climate crisis. And plastic production is on the increase, and so the emissions produced from refining this oil, turning it into plastics, transporting it around the globe, disposing of it after we've used it, it's only going to increase and actually have a really large impact on the climate in coming years, which is really worrying. And the second thing is that on the other side of it, when plastic's been used and discarded and ends up as litter, it's actually, there's evidence starting to be found that plastic could actually be interfering in really vital processes to our planet in the oceans, such as the ocean carbon cycle and the phytoplankton that normally will die and sink to the ocean's floor and their waste, and all of this carbon will basically be trapped back in the ocean. but plastics, and in particular microplastics, as you said earlier, are starting to be ingested by these microscopic organisms, and this can affect their buoyancy, and it can affect the buoyancy of their weight. And it actually means that all of this carbon that we need to be trapping and not releasing into the atmosphere and into the environment actually could stay around, and this could have a really big impact on global climate systems, just because this, all of this vital carbon is not actually being trapped as it should be. So I think plastic is really worrying in that sense, because not only it's having this really devastating impact on marine life and on wildlife, but it's also could be linking to these really large global issues that, exactly as you were saying, could be causing, for example, the next mass extinction and harm to us as well as humans.
That's amazing, of course, to hear. And Amy, what do you think? Do you consider us as the younger generation lucky to be able to see the impacts of such damages and take action about it? Or what do you think?
I would say I don't know whether it'd be classed as lucky, just because the reason why so many young people are taking action is because we see the urgency of it, and because we see that not only is it already having an impact on the places that we live and the people in the countries that we inhabit, but also it's going to be directly impacting our future. And I do think that's one of the reasons why there's such a massive amount of young people who are interested in these issues and are actually trying to take action against them. So I guess it would be hard to say that we're lucky because of that, but I do think that we have such an important role to play. And I think that the fact that young people are starting to be listened to is something that hasn't really been seen as much throughout history on environmental issues, and now it's just about trying to harness this voice and come together and keep up the fight against these issues, so that basically we have a future and we have a planet that we can live on that's safe to inhabit for us and our children.
So Amy, speaking about all this, the truth is that no matter how grave our mistakes, nature will finally overcome them. And the truth is that without us, nature will rebuild. So Amy, to conclude, what's your message to the audience?
I think it's a good question. I think that my message to people, would just be take action now. Don't wait. Whether you're a young person, don't forget the impact that you can have even when you are young, and the youth voice is so important. So don't be afraid to speak up about things that you're passionate about and make changes. And even if you've got older listeners who aren't young people, no young person is ever going to say that this is just a young person's fight. Ultimately, everyone needs to come together. It's an intergenerational change. The important thing is just doing things straight away, because the reason these issues have spiraled out of control so much, and the reason why we're facing such extreme environmental crises, is just because action has been put off for so long. These issues aren't new. They haven't just come out the blue in the last 5-10 years. They've been around for decades. And so the last thing we need now is for action to be put off. And so starting yourself in your everyday life in whichever way you find most effective, I think is just such an important thing. And we all have a really important role to play.
So thank you very much for joining us, Amy. The truth is that together we all stand, keeping the wild alive and our planet as well. Our past may be written, but our future is yet to be determined and is in all of our hands. It's our responsibility to save our blue planet, we can say. Now, what we do depends on us all. So thank you very much for joining us today, Amy, and have a wonderful day ahead.
I've always been interested in nature.
Kind of Mother Nature's perfect animal,
Seeing Nile crocodiles and being kind of terrified.
Welcome to the Nature Talks podcast.